Hello, welcome to our third video on the Python course. The video title is Lists, Tuples, and For Loops. So last time we discussed the Boolean variables and if conditions, and before we discussed this other type of variables like strings, integers, and floats. Now let's say that you want to create a variable that carries the name of students in a class. So you cannot do this with just string. String will just allow you to define one variable or one name. So the data type that you could use to do this is called lists. So let's start with an example. This example. So I have a student as a variable. So I have a variable called students, and it's equal to this entity here. Start with a square bracket, okay, and then I pass to it names of students. So I passed Nancy, Mark, Lisa. Please remember that you cannot do this. You cannot remove the quotation marks. Then it will automatically understand that Nancy is a variable and will ask you for the value for this variable. So I put this back. Okay. And if you run this, I print students, you'll get the names of the students in the list. Fine. So what is the type of this variable? So I remember that I told you that Python knows the keyword type. The keyword type you can use to know the variable type. And here, if we did this, so print the type of students, we get class list. Okay, fine. Now we move to the next step, which is now I want to access some of the elements in the array. So if you look at the array here, you have Nancy as the first element, Mark as the second element, Lisa as the third element. Although this is the Nancy called the first element, it has an index of 0. Okay, so remember this. It has an index of 0, not 1. So the indexing in Python starts with 0, like any other programming language. So let's move to this box. So I uncomment this, and I say, please print student 0 and student 2. What do you think the output will be? So in this case, the output will be Nancy and Lisa, because this is Nancy is index 0, Mark index 1, Lisa index 2. So I'm printing 1 and 2. So this is Nancy and Lisa. So let's run this. Yeah, so Nancy and Lisa, as you see here. So the way we write this is just the name of the variable, okay, students. Right away after the name is a square bracket, so no space here, okay, so no space between the square bracket and the students or the variable name, okay, and then the index, and then you close the square bracket. We did the same here, but we changed the index to 2. Fine. Now, what if I want to change the list? So let's say that I will replace the first element from being Nancy to another name, maybe Ahmed here. So let's do this. So the way you do this is just by assigning a new value to this element. So I access this element again the same way I access the element here, just by the name of the variable and then a square bracket and then the index that it tells you what element you are. First element, and I replace the first element with Ahmed, as you see here. And then I print this, and successfully we change the first element. Good. Okay, so one thing I want to do also, adding an element to the array. So I want to add an element to the array. So I want to add Nancy to the end of the array. So the way you do this is by using a function called append. This is automatically exist in any list. Okay, so once you create a variable list, you can access a function inside this variable list called append. How do you access this function? Is you access it by writing the name of the variable. Here, the name of the variable is student or students, and then you may write dot, no space, okay, dot, and then append, okay. So this function, the compiler or the Python interpreter knows, okay, so it will not complain. And then you make not a square bracket here, remember, so this is just the parentheses, not a square bracket, the parentheses, and you pass the value you want to add, and then you close the bracket. We run this. Okay, so if you want to double check what happened, so you can print again students. Okay, so we added Nancy to the end of the list. Also, you should know that it's important to know the length of your array. So how would you do this? There is a function built in Python called len, ELN. That's why the color changed when I wrote it now. And you pass to it students with a variable, your list. And it tells you that there are 6 elements in the array. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, okay? It counts the number of elements, so it will not start at 0 as we do with the indexing. It just counts the number of elements. Okay, another type that you could use to make a list of variables, tuple, but it's different than the list, and we'll explain this now. So let's say that I will make a new variable called name, and it's tuple. How it's different from the array? Well, you see how it starts here. Start with the parentheses, okay? Not with a square bracket, and this is the difference of defining a tuple than list. Okay, so now I'm defining a tuple, so it's just the parentheses. Okay, and if you print it, good. So you get the first and the first and the last name, Isaac Newton. Okay, you access the elements the same way you did with the lists. Okay. Now, what is the difference between tuples and lists? Well, tuples not change, or it's called immutable. Okay, so lists are mutable, tuples are not mutable, or are immutable. So you cannot change it. So remember when we did this here, changing the first element in the array from Nancy to Ahmed, we could do this with the lists. But if you try to do this with tuples, you should expect an error. Okay, so let's run this. See, tuple object doesn't support item assignment because you cannot change it. Also, you cannot add elements to it. So you might use the tuple for something like storing first and last name because they are unlikely to change. Some cases they change, but they are unlikely to change. Also, maybe for defining a point, XYZ coordinates of a point that it's unlikely to change, then tuple will be the appropriate data structure or the appropriate container. Okay, so this takes us to loops. So to explain loops, let's do this with an example. Here, I have a list called students, and it has it's a list of tuples. So you see, it's a list of tuples. So the first element is Isaac Newton. So the tuples representing first and last name. The second one is Mark Twain, and the third one is Mike Cooper, and the fourth one is Nancy Frank. Okay, Each student has a grade in both physics and English. So I created two other lists. One is called physics grades, and one is called English grades. So the first list is a list of strings, and the second list is a list of integers. Okay. Second and third lists are a list of integers. Now, let's try to print for the first student the grades. So print the first and last name, and then print the physics grades. Okay, so this is the command that, this is the code, line code that will do this. So print student name. This is just a string that it will be printed anyway. And then pass to it the first index for the students list. So this should return this one. And as you see here. Okay. And then you print the physics grade, and you get the first grade, the first physics grade for the first student, which is the first element, which with index 0, and this is 100, and this is what we got here. And then you do the same for the English you got here. So you see that I made a new line just to avoid having very long line, and you can do this. What I mean here, from going from here to here, you can do this as long as there is a parenthesis you didn't close. So I didn't close this parenthesis here. I didn't close, so that you still can do this. You can move from line to a line, and then when you close the parentheses, then the line is finished, or this is the end of the line. Okay, so let's write it in a nicer way. I'm saying, so print student name, and then pass the name of the array, and this is the first index, so this is returning the first element here, which is this tuple, and then another index, which returns the first element in the tuple. Okay, so the first index here, this first 0 is for the list. So this is an index for the list. Okay, but the second index is the index for the tuple. So meaning the 0 and 0 meaning the first element and then the first element in the tuple. Okay, and student of 0 and 1, so still we are in the first element in student, but the second name or the last name here, because we have 1 instead of 0. Okay, so this is just to avoid having this kind of printing the parentheses as well as the quotation marks. It's not very nice. So the second line is better now. Okay, now I want to print, let's say, the third element or the last element in the array, which is Nancy. Okay, so I define a variable here called I, and I equal to 3. Okay, so I will use this as an index. So here print student name and then students and passing to it I. So as I'm passing to it 3 is equivalent to I'm passing to student 3. So this should access the last element, which is Nancy. Okay, and then the rest is the same as we did on the top box here. So this is our equivalent. So if I want to print all the elements in the list, okay, what should I do? I need the computer to automatically change this I. Okay, I need the computer to change this I. Wants to make it 3, wants to make it 0. So if I did it 0, you will see that it will print the first one. Okay, and if I did it 1, should be print the second element, and so on. Okay, so now I want the computer to automatically do this. This is possible through something called for loops. How we write this? Look at the box here. Okay, so it says for I in range 4. Okay, so I say for I, this is the variable I in range 4. So this means change the value of I each iteration from 0 to 4, but it will not include 4. It will go up to 3. So if you run this, you will see that it will print. So I'm printing through this 4 iterations. You'll see the first time I was 0, and then 1, and then 3, and then 2, and then 3. Okay, so note please the indentation here. Indentation, as we explained with the if condition, is the scope of the for loop. Okay, so meaning that you could have another print here, for example, print anything inside for loop, and I will have something else here. Okay, outside loop. Okay, so you see that this print statement inside the for loop was printed 3 times, while outside the loop for loop is only once. And this is because this is intended inside was shifted to be inside the scope of the for loop. So this is done through the indentation. Okay, but the last one is outside the for loop. That's why it's only printed once. And if you shifted this here, you also expect this to be printed only once. Okay, so I hope this is clear now. Okay, so automatically the computer changed the range of I from 0 to 4. Okay, so this should help us to do the printing. And as you see here, when we run this code, so I'm changing I from 0 to 4, okay? So you see that it's automatically changing the I, the index I, and then you get the printing of all the elements in the array. Okay? Fine. Now, just for you to know that you can iterate in different way in the for loops. So instead of having for I in range 4, you can say for I in students. This means for each element in students list. So students still is our list that include the name of the students. Okay. So if you run this, you should get each of the elements there. Okay, so this is changed because we changed the array when we did the append to Ahmad. So maybe I can yeah, I need to run this again. Okay. Yeah. So now we have the correct array. So again, I'll put this here in this box just for you to know what we are talking about. So these are our lists. So students is again our list that include the first and last name of all the students. And then you have the physics grade and English grades. Okay. So when you do it this way for I in students, and then you print I, so I is not an index in this case. I is each element in the student. So this is element number 1. So that's why it's printed like this. This is element number 2. This is element number 3. This is element number 4. Okay, this is what you get here. Okay. Different than what we did it last time, how we did it last time. So we did it again for I in range. So range is the function that it's built in Python, and Python knows it. Okay. So I'll say 4, for example, and I'll say print student, and in this case you have to pass I as an index. So here I is an index. Here I is a tuple. Okay, it's an object or tuple. So if I run this, you will see it's exactly identical. So this is coming from the first loop, and then here this comes from the second loop. Okay, we are almost done here. So if we want to do this printing the whole thing again with this other the first method here, by passing I as a tuple, not as an index, but now you need to print also the grade. So how would you iterate over more than one array or one list? So this is done in Python using a keyword called zip. Okay, so you say for I, j, k in zip students, physics grades, English grades. This means that I will iterate over students, j will iterate over physics grades, k will iterate over English grades. And then the rest is very simple. So we'll say that print students I of 0. So this is for the first name, okay? And I is not an index, remember. So this is for the first name. I of 1 is the second name, so Newton here in this case. Physics grade is we use J to iterate over physics grades. So J is the first grade in the physics grades list, and then K is the first grade in the English grades list, and this is what we have here. Okay, so that's it for this lesson, and next time we'll do for loops, and we will also give some complicated example that merge both conditions and for loops. Okay, good luck, and thank